Hey, Legal Rebels, this is Tom Martin. I'm the founder of LawDroid, and this is my podcast, LawDroid Manifesto, where I interview legal innovators about how they do what they do. In this episode, I interview Ken Crutchfield, who with 30 years experience at the convergence of software and information technology has been a driving force in transforming the business of law. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the LawDroid Manifesto podcast. I'm Tom Martin, your host. And today I have Ken Crutchfield. It's a pleasure to have him on. He is a heavy hitter in the legal industry, and he is the VP and General Manager of Legal Markets at Wolters Kluwer. And with that, Ken, if you could tell us where you're at right now and what you're up to.
It's great to be here. Thank you so much for having me on. I am sitting in Alexandria, Virginia, in a small row home, which is basically my home office when I don't go to New York. That's where I'm at right now, and I am really enjoying this opportunity to speak with you more.
Sounds great. And I right before we started, I was complimenting you on the teak mid-century furniture you have behind you.
Yes. My wife got into mid-century when we moved from New Jersey down to Alexandria a number of years back. And so going and downsizing into a smaller place, we ended up with a whole bunch of mid-century furniture, including this Knoll tulip table that I'm using and I have my setup on right now. So
very nice. So you're in Alexandria, Virginia now, you said?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Did you start out there?
No, I actually was born in Atlanta, grew up in Dayton, Dayton, Ohio is where I would say that I originally grew up and would be my home. I moved back and forth between Atlanta and Dayton a couple of times during my childhood. But Dayton was a great place to grow up in. It was fun. There was an interesting backdrop too, especially with the Wright brothers. General Motors did a lot of their innovation. Their R&D was there with Charles Kettering and the self-starter, but a lot of other things played out through there. One of the original four companies that were part of IBM, the formation of IBM was in Dayton, and then you had NCR. So there was a lot of technology, a lot of innovation coming out. And as a matter of fact, one of the things I'm trying to validate for other purposes is that there were more inventions per capita coming out of Dayton, Ohio, at the turn of the century, 1900, than any place in the world. And that's kind of, a cool thing for me. My dad has, I think, 7 or 8 patents to his name and was also involved in some innovation. And he was always, idea a minute, very strong personality, and really influenced a lot of my upbringing.
Wow. That I think is maybe not popularly known anymore, but I guess it was kind of like the Silicon Valley of the 19th and early 20th century.
There are some articles that have referred to it as that it was, Silicon Valley before Silicon Valley, but, heavy manufacturing orientation, a lot with aviation, and Wright-Patterson Air Force Base ended up, there because of the Wright brothers. And so there was a lot of work and government investment that went into that.
That's really interesting. You said your dad had a number of patents. How many did he have?
7 or 8. I think one was a design patent. The other ones were patents while he was at Mead Paper Corporation. So he was involved in the development of the Trapper Keeper. None of his patents were related to that.
Are you kidding me?
No, Keeper? I'm not. No, I'm
That's
not.
Awesome.
So he was involved in school supplies primarily, but he got into some interesting things. Like he had a patent on microencapsulation, where taking chemicals that would, when you put pressure on them, it would emit light and then create a copy of an image. And Mead actually went into a whole manufacturing effort around color copying early on, based upon that technology that was developed. So there are interesting things like that. He was very outside the box thinker. Wasn't particularly technically savvy, so he wasn't restrained by like the laws of physics in terms of some of his ideas, which me being somebody who is an engineer by learning and by education, and good in math and things like that, it always kind of drove me nuts sometimes when he, proposed something that was going to break the laws of physics. But I think that was also part of the strength in what he was able to do, was challenge things that other people thought couldn't be done.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. And it kind of gets into one of the questions I had about your early inspirations. It sounds like your dad was one of them.
He was. He was a strong personality. I mean, I remember my sister kind of explaining how he was in terms of uh, at the dinner table. If you were talking, he'd tell everybody to shut up and be quiet because he was watching the news, because it was all about him. So there was definitely aspects like that, but he definitely was always talking about work, and I got to listen into many work conversations as a result of that, and I think that shaped a lot of my thinking, especially when we're talking about customers and understanding things, because he was a real evangelist for understanding problems from a customer perspective.
You ended up getting, you just mentioned electrical engineering degree, right?
Yes.
Bachelor of Science. What led you there? Like why did you pick that?
I wanted to be an astronaut. So when, going through all the processes, you get to like junior and high school, and well, what do you really want to do? It's like, well, when I was 7, I wanted to be an astronaut. I circled back on that. I applied to the Air Force Academy. I ended up an alternate. I did not get in, but I wanted to do that because I wanted to go fly jets and get into the space program. And basically, when I didn't get in there, I decided, well, I'm just going to go with my friends to Ohio State, because if I can't get to where I wanted to be, I'm going to do something different. I think one of the things that was interesting in that was I did get nominated to West Point, and I didn't even actually, play into that. That was something I didn't want to do it. I didn't fill out the paperwork, but in hindsight, I think, from an emotional intelligence and from a political perspective, I didn't understand that they were probably saying, if you fill out the paperwork, you can go to West Point. So, but I didn't want to. So it was just one of those interesting things.
Yeah, it's definitely is an interesting thing. I know as a little kid, I used to play in my backyard pretending that maybe someday I could be an astronaut, but you are actually taking concrete steps to become one.
I tried to. Now, I took my first aerospace classes at Ohio State and decided I did not want to be an aerospace engineer. So electrical is where I ended up. And then I always knew I had a good business sense. So the MBA became a very natural follow on once I had that foundation of, really literally being able to understand through electrical engineering how to go down to, the chip level and the atomic behaviors that created diodes you'd put on a chip, and build that up into what would become a computer, and software that would make it operate.
You glossed over it because it's something that is very this is your life. And yeah, I got my electrical engineering degree and then I got my MBA. Hold on a second. That's a little unusual, like getting an MBA, at least from my experience, after a science degree like that. So what was that connection? Like, why, people might think kind of common sense, well, you would go on to become an engineer and be working, doing that for the rest of your life, or, something in a similar vein. So what led you to the business?
Right. So I knew I didn't want to be an engineer. I liked the degree, but I didn't want to be an engineer. And I actually started interning. So when you talk about like my experience, I have on my bio that I've been around for over 30 years. The reality is it's 42. I started as a 19-year-old at LexisNexis, what is now LexisNexis, as an intern. And one of the things that I learned there early on was that I could understand what the marketing people were saying and the business people, and what the technology people were saying. And there were very few people that could actually translate between. So that became kind of my understanding of, okay, I want to be in a technology business, but I also want to be on the business side, and because I can walk both sides and understand and translate. So that's really what got me into getting an MBA, and I did it part-time over 5 years. So every class that I took, I went back and used as a case study. So most of the MBA programs at the time were basically manufacturing oriented. And here I am at this online information service company that is basically one of the two companies that have invented commercial search engines before Google. And I'm able to do cost accounting or business strategy, international business, anything like that, based upon an organization that was very leading edge at the time. And that the professors ate up and made it really fun to both learn the business, but also get a really valuable experience with an MBA at the same time.
And I think one of the things you pointed out is a takeaway that I've gotten from a few people I've talked to on the podcast. And it's that generalization mindset. It's like the ability to cross train against different, different areas of knowledge that really come in handy, especially I think right now with AI and the way that it in itself kind of cross trains against different areas. It makes it a lot easier
Absolutely.
to get into that. So just staying for a moment still with the earlier stuff, were there any other inspirations for you at that time?
It's the ones that really make me, I think, shaped me the most. I think one other one was competitiveness. I was not a particularly good athlete in high school, but I really wanted to be. And I didn't look at it until later in life. I had surgery on my sinuses at some point because I was always getting sick and I could never breathe through both nostrils. And once I had that fix, it was life changing. And I had energy that I didn't have, and I had the ability to, actually work out and not get sick. And so I realized that one of the things in hindsight was I was a really competitive person. I was just trying to compete in areas that I was not set up physiologically to be able to be successful with. And once I learned that about myself, it really kind of changed my trajectory in terms of what I thought about expectations of what I could do in the business world.
Yet another takeaway here is just having the grit and discipline to stick at something. Sometimes that makes the difference. Like you could be naturally talented in something, but if you don't have the commitment or the heart to keep at it, you're not going to succeed against somebody who, like you, is just dedicated to it.
There's a work ethic aspect of that, and it has played through the family. And I actually have a couple of kids who have been in did Division I athletics in college, and both of them, my younger two sons, both were very much the sort of I'm going to be the first there, and I'm going to be the last to leave, and that was very much their philosophy, and that plays out with them to this day.
Yeah, Philo, first in, last out.
Yes,
It's a good philosophy of life too, not just an accounting method.
right.
In the 30 years, I mean, you've worked at everywhere from Bloomberg to Thomson Reuters to LexisNexis and now Wolters Kluwer. Not to get into a lot of detail about the prior positions, but just in general, like what are some of the things you learned from those experiences?
I think being in the online world before people even knew what online was or Google was a very strong competitive advantage to understanding, especially in the legal industry where there are things that it's the same issues just being talked about. It's just been 40 years in some ways. Like, how do you bill a client? What the billable hour has been something that's been discussed forever. So there are things like that I think were great. My time at Thomson and in Bloomberg were more in tax software, so I did get to learn other industries and not exclusively the legal industry, but it was a good natural parallel to be able to learn across industries and see professionals have issues that are very similar and needs and problems that are very similar, whether you're at a McKinsey or at a big four accounting firm or a law firm. So that was, I think, something that was reaffirming through that whole process. And I actually worked for a internet startup at one time that was doing consulting work also. So I learned it as a consultant too in the internet space.
So one question I have is your title now is Vice President and General Manager of Legal Markets, right? What does that mean? What does that mean?
Perfect. So it really means legal markets is the law firm legal research portion of Wolters Kluwer. So in the US. So there is a broader legal and regulatory US business that includes products that are around medical coding and pension planning and pension reporting software and other things that are beyond just the legal research product. So that's really the core of what I do is the legal research product. I've also been involved with a product called Legisway, which is a contract lifecycle management product that is used by corporate legal departments to be able to manage their law department, basically, and has an emphasis on contracts, but also entities and other capabilities.
For the audience members that have heard of Wolters Kluwer, but they're not familiar with like the wide scope of it, if you can give them a little overview of that.
Perfect. Wolters Kluwer is about a $6 billion, 6 billion euro company, strong cash flows, headquartered in Alphen in the Netherlands, but we have operations around the world. The tagline for the business is when you have to be right, and we serve professionals in health, financial services, tax and accounting, and legal. So there's a lot of commonality and themes there. As a matter of fact, when we were building our AI products, one of the things I do is every 2 weeks, I'm meeting with the people in tax and accounting and health to compare notes on what are they thinking, what are they hearing, what are they seeing. And it's been a great benefit, for me in terms of our ability to build product. So that's really kind of the broader thing, is providing information and increasingly software to professionals.
And you know what, before diving deeper into that, just to step a couple steps back for a second, the position you have right now, just based on what we talked about your experience and background and growing up, sounds like an ideal place, like for you, but also they're very lucky to get you with this, constellation of experience.
It's definitely fun. It's a great time to be in the legal space, and it's been a great time for me to be at Wolters Kluwer.
Yeah, so let's dive into that and talk a little bit more about where we're at, because we're almost exactly on the 2-year anniversary of ChatGPT having dropped. And yes, even though machine learning, deep learning, AI has been around for a long time, it captured the public imagination and has actually been quite useful for people. So along those lines, Wolters Kluwer has its Future Ready Lawyer Report that it comes out annually, but this year it had some really big figures about usage of AI and adoption of AI, both for in-house counsel and law firms, right?
Right. So this is the 6th year that we've done the Future Ready Lawyer Report. And when we started it, there was a lot of discussion around the debate of how important is technology in the practice of law, and then where technology is applicable, which technologies, and how do you deploy it? There were gaps in terms of expectations and knowing how to use it, and really gaps between what corporate legal departments were thinking about and what law firms were thinking about with respect to technology. So that was kind of the baseline, 5 years ago. Then COVID happened, and all of a sudden, well, there was no debate about certain technologies, because if you couldn't access your information or communicate with your customers or clients through Teams or Zoom or whatever, the technology accelerated through the pandemic in a very material way for the legal industry. Then you fast forward to November 30th of 2022, when ChatGPT 3.5 Turbo was released, and all of a sudden everybody is aware, holy cow, look what this technology can do. And I remember just typing in a clause, help me with a clause for consequential damages that keeps me from being sued if a transaction goes south and doesn't happen, which is a fairly common kind of legal clause that you would put in a transaction, whether it's real estate or a merger or acquisition of a company. And it gave a very incredible answer, and I was like, wow, this is something big. So I dug in and learned that over the winter holiday of 2022, because I knew this was intuitively as big as the Gutenberg printing press to me. So we can hit on that in a little bit, but that was really kind of the place where the technology and the whole idea with Future Ready Lawyer was demonstrating, well, there's consensus that technology is important. Partners at firms were sitting up straight in their chair, realizing this was a real disruptor for the first time, where I think partners and firms didn't really take technology as seriously. So fast forward to today, and I think the biggest takeaway from this year's survey was 76% of in-house lawyers and 68% of law firm lawyers use ChatGPT once a week, which I find very amazing. I shouldn't say ChatGPT, but Gen AI once a week. That's pretty phenomenal, especially when you think about all the issues around AI governance that's starting to emerge. Can you use AI on a particular client's work? If they say, I don't want you to, how do you show that you didn't? Does spell check in Microsoft Word count as AI because it's technically AI? There's a lot of interesting issues that play out from that. And that's what I think a lot of the conversation and debate should be coming out of this survey.
Well, one of those last ones you mentioned, like proving the negative, that's that might be difficult to do. Um, but I share with you like all of the excitement over the past 2 years. For the first time ever, like you had a machine able to reply and hold a conversation with you intelligently. I mean, it's still mind blowing. The thing that's weird about us as human beings, I think, is how easily we move the goalposts.
Right. Right.
And John McCarthy, who was one of the godfathers of AI back in 1955, he coined the phrase artificial intelligence. And one of the things that he said over his career was, as soon as it starts working, it's not AI.
Right. Right. It's fascinating. I think, just even as I write articles or write responses now, I think about that probabilistic sort of approach that Gen AI uses to, guess the stem of a word, then the next part of the word, and comes up with very good answers. Sometimes I think when I actually write, I don't know exactly where it's going to go, but each word that goes onto the screen adds a little bit more to where I end up and what the thought is that I'm trying to express. And I'm not even sure that it's that different than the way AI works sometimes. So it's very fascinating to me trying to think through how does that relate then to the human mind, and what can Gen AI potentially do in the future?
To dig a little deeper into the stats that you mentioned, one thing that it implies to me is that, in the past you'd have a kind of like a normal distribution on a bell curve in terms of tech adoption. And they even have, I forget the name of the guy who put it together, but you have like early adopters and you have your skeptics at the end. And, it's fairly smooth. But these figures, 2 years out, 76% in-house, 68% of law firms, you're talking about like a very acute adoption cycle. Why do you think that is?
I think it's because it works. It embraces, the work of knowledge workers, people that use information and produce ideas and thoughts. I think that is really the key. Even the idea of the fear around hallucinations, I think, is one of those things that if you harness it the right way, come up with an argument as to why this brief is wrong, or do other things, it may spawn ideas in service like brainstorming in ways that you couldn't do otherwise.
I'm curious, like this is kind of like a meta question or a stepping back question, but why does Wolters Kluwer do this research? Like why do they do the research of finding out how people are using AI?
It's generally just looking at and trying to provide something to the industry that helps people, be aware of what the trends are, what needs to be done to be future ready. So from that standpoint, it's really thought leadership and helping the industry understand. But to the extent that also makes people aware of how Wolters Kluwer can support and help professionals, that's a benefit too.
One thing I've heard about is when it comes to these statistics, is that they're very helpful, but at the same time, there is some stealth usage, right? Like there's some shadow usage of AI that doesn't always get reported. So the figures that might actually be higher than they seem. Have you heard about that?
I was thinking about it the other way, that maybe this is a little more honest that 76% are using, but if you were doing something inside a company, you might not get that same reported number. That was kind of where I was thinking about, especially with the number of organizations that are very cautious. Do not put company client confidential information into ChatGPT. Only use our sandbox, but you can't have access to the sandbox or whatever. Those sorts of things are the things that I have thought of. And my reaction was, I felt like there's a lot of attorneys that probably don't have access to a safe ChatGPT solution, or a safe Gemini, or a safe Llama, or Claude product, or a solution that incorporates Gen AI.
So what do you think are some ways that law firms and law departments should use it that is a safe way to use it?
I think we're really in early days, so this is a very interesting area. So when I've talked to law firms, especially large law firms, they've been very cautious. There's a handful of firms out there that really want to be tech leaning and be known as legal innovators, and then you've got a large group that are, similar to Wolters Kluwer. When you have to be right, they want to be correct. They want to manage risk, so they're being much more deliberate in terms of how the technology is being used. So I think drafting is certainly a place where you're going to see it. I think you're going to see, research, legal research. I think over time you will start to see specific tasks and workflow be laid out. So how do you file a 10K? How do you update a 10K? Or how do you automate the M&A process more using Gen AI? But I also think it's important to recognize that Gen AI is just another tool. It's something that goes in the toolkit, but it's not the be all end all. And I think that's one thing that, a lot of people end up getting focused on the bright, shiny object and forget that, you should really be thinking about what is the problem you're trying to solve, and then applying the appropriate tools to that problem. And Gen AI may be part of it, but maybe not the entire answer all by itself.
Yeah, I totally agree. There's the shiny object thing. What do you think are some examples of, I guess, the usage of Gen AI that is unnecessary or too much? Like maybe just use old-fashioned automation tools that we have.
One place I've seen it is extraction of information, like out of a contract. There are other technologies and AI technologies that are focused a little bit more on pulling information out and structuring it from an unstructured document. And so I think there are things like that where there might be other technologies that could actually do it better than ChatGPT alone, because ChatGPT is really good at language, and Gen AI is really good at language, but it's good at creating things, creating and generating language as opposed to extracting. So that would be an example that I would say there might be other tools in the toolkit to accomplish the same problem.
Yeah, that's a great one, because then you wouldn't have the potential risk of errors, hallucinations. Let's just call them errors. There's also like the fact that you could really dial it in and have the micro control over how it's doing what it's doing.
Right.
I love the phrase, when you got to get it right. Is that
when you have to be right?
When you have to be right. Because that is such the zeitgeist right now with
Yes.
lawyers. And yeah, I think that, it sounds like you all have the right approach to this, and one that resonates with lawyers.
Right. When we've been building our product in Vital Law, we spent a lot of time talking to customers before doing anything in building out a solution, which is a little different. We've been a little more, I won't say low key, but we've been a little more focused and sober in terms of what we think the technology can do and not do, and recognizing that it is not going to be perfect. and communicating that. So even when we did this, one of the things that really resonated with us, with customers, was first off that we're being deliberate and kind of mirroring what most of the market's doing and how they're evaluating AI. But we've also incorporated the concept of human in the loop, if you will, or in our world, editor in the loop, where we have an attorney on in-house at Wolters Kluwer that helps with the generation of AI, created answers. And more common answers, for example, are reviewed by an editor and edited if needed to make sure that they're correct. So there are things like that we do in providing that transparency to know that a human has actually looked at this as opposed to it being lights out AI. And that has really resonated with our customers.
Those are called golden answers, right?
Yeah, golden answers, yes.
Yeah. Let's get into all the AI stuff in a minute. But before we do, I'd like to get a little bit of like the before picture of Vital Law. Like, first, if you could explain what Vital Law is as a platform.
Vital Law is a legal research platform that has expert information that is focused more in practice areas. So we tend to market more to law firms and large firms, the largest of the large. And if you're a securities attorney, a tax attorney, you work in privacy and cyber, labor and employment, health, those are examples of areas where we go deep in terms of the coverage that we have. So we have primary source information, curate the court cases that are relevant and cover news, but we also write and have outside authors that are writing treatises like Ginsburg, the Ginsburg treatise, which is helpful for someone that's looking to identify a tax structure for an acquisition. Folk on Delaware is kind of the gold standard when you're looking at Delaware law. Those are the sorts of things that Vital Law has. And so we focus very much on end user attorneys. Librarians absolutely use our product also, but we're really focused on what the end user attorney is looking to do, whether it's in transactional law or other things. We are not typically used for litigation because the focus of other vendors is on comprehensive case law. And that's something that, when you get to a dispute, that's really not what we focus on. We focus on that regulatory compliance component. That's almost, if you think about it, as a corporation wants to be a good corporate citizen, how do you comply? How does a law firm help advise a client on how to comply with law so they stay out of trouble and stay out of court?
I like that. You're proactive, not reactive.
Yes.
And in being proactive and providing that insight, I think that what you're describing aligns really well with number one, and we'll talk about this next, but what AI could do in terms of giving people ready and quick access to the information they need. And then secondly, aligns with where lawyers are going in light of AI. And what I mean by that is, I think the trend is that lawyers will have to become even more hyper-specific and hyper-knowledgeable about their practice area, because the generalizable like route stuff can be more easily automated. And so that you provide them that lens, that portal into that expertise.
Right. I think one thing that I've noticed, remember back in the day when calculators were coming out and people were like, oh my gosh, if you don't learn long division, how are you ever going to be able to do math if you rely on this calculator? And I think AI is going to have similar sorts of capabilities here we're going to have that same sort of reaction, especially like with law firms training and how they're going to educate that next group of attorneys that join firms. I think it wasn't that long ago that people were working through bankers' boxes looking for documents, and that was how you cut your teeth as an attorney. So I think there's going to be some interesting things, especially for like law schools that start to teach how to leverage these AI technologies as an extension of the attorney in training. That will be very interesting.
So let's talk about the AI layer. So
Yeah.
two questions. Like, first off, when did you add that to Vital Law? And then secondly, what are some of like the common skills that are available?
So what we did, we launched officially in September, so very recently, in terms of having a commercial product that's available. What we've done is we've incorporated very Google-like capabilities. So if you think about using Google the ability to see an AI generated answer to your search query. People also ask sorts of questions. That is the sort of capability that we've incorporated in. So it's very familiar and easy to use and a natural extension to anybody who is using Google and also was using VitalLaw before. The other thing we did was add an AI assistant that allows you to chat with documents in your search results or individual treatises, for example. So if you want to chat with Ginsburg and ask, the Ginsburg treatise for things, we've incorporated the 4O model. So it's got a very large context window and allows for, basically asking questions of a large body of content. So those are the core things that we've added. What we're discovering, because we've created a prompt guide that we're working through for explaining how here's how you prompt a system, because even if we have the best system in the world, if you don't have attorneys knowing some of the basic concepts of chain of thought prompting or other things, you're not going to get as much out of an application like VitalLaw. So we're finding very interesting things like explaining how to create a checklist to make something more actionable, and basically defining practical content, or how to chat with the treatise, or we had a demo recently with a large firm, and they had a thought leadership piece, and we showed how you could basically get a very comparable piece done in like 3 minutes if you prompted the system the right way. So there was a quick acknowledgement that, wow, that would have saved us a lot of time in creating this as a first draft to then edit and finalize.
Yeah, for sure. Especially, I think people sometimes get confused between ChatGPT, the consumer-facing version. That yes, you could even have the paid version. That's great, but there's a marked difference, like a world of difference, when you actually connect it to a specialized area of knowledge.
Yes. So, and that's a great point, Tom. Is that I think the legal industry and the way VitalLaw works is it's working on trusted information that's been developed and has the Wolters Kluwer name on it. So when you're applying AI, it's really summarizing or manipulating with its language skills the information that you trust already, and that's one of the ways that you reduce the potential of hallucinations, because it's not just probabilistically going out and making up an answer. It's starting with trusted documents.
It's a great advantage. I think a lot of incumbent research companies like Wolters Kluwer, like that's a huge, advantage you have over a lot of the new legal tech startups, which there's many of them coming to market now. It's probably a little early, but maybe on a follow-up episode about the kind of usage that you're seeing with VitalLaw and people engaging with AI, but that would be interesting to see how that breaks down. I'm sure that you'll probably take some of the usage as indicators of how to expand it and build it out further.
Absolutely. That's understanding the context of how a user is using, what were they doing 3 minutes before, 3 minutes after the use is great context. And then just being able to understand and be close to customers, we're going to learn a lot. And then, some of the things that we'll do aren't necessarily going to be AI. It's going to be, okay, here's the next step, and here's a rules-based technology or something else that allows for greater benefit or connectivity and value and impact for a customer.
So I think this naturally segues into this question that I have for you, because we just talked about the law firm that could have put a thought piece together in 3 minutes versus however long it took them, which is probably hours. And is the billable hour dead? Like, is that model, is it still going to stick around? Because with all these efficiency gains, yes, there's quantitative gains, but there's also some subjective gains in that you get to get out of work earlier and all that good stuff. Is that going to kill the billable hour?
This could be a podcast all by itself. My answer is it depends, putting a consultant hat on real quick. Yeah. But I think if you have a task takes 10 hours today and is high value and it can be done for 3 hours, the billable rate might go up. But if it's work that is more commodity based, the competition is going to drive the billable hour down. If this creates more repeatability in something, it may go in-house. The work may actually go in-house or becomes predictable so that you could actually put an alternate fee arrangement together that is not based upon the billable hour. So I think there's going to be a lot of different ways that it's going to play out, but to the extent that it creates a little more predictability, I do think that you will see alternate fee arrangements that are not based strictly on the billable hour. But is the billable hour going to go away? I don't see that happening in the near future, in the foreseeable future.
All right, you heard it here, everyone. It's not going to go away in the near future, which is a good thing because we still need that income. But it is going to, change over time. There's going to be less reliance on it because, you could just set up these tools. One of the things is I think law firms should really lean into the use of AI as a way of making their relationship with their clients stickier by providing them with generative AI tools that can give them a view into their expertise without them, trying to prevent them from going straight to ChatGPT or something like that, where the law firm can stay in that conversation by themselves providing a tool to their clients. The double whammy of COVID plus ChatGPT dropping, both of those were instrumental, I think, in the sea change that we're seeing. Do you think that this would have happened without them?
I think it's really just the pace. There's so much pent up demand for legal services. I think there was a study done over in Europe that was talking about the amount of latent demand for legal services. And my experience is there are very few attorneys that I've ever come across, even in small, real estate transaction organizations, that aren't busy. So there's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot with access to justice, a lot of people that don't actually have access to attorneys to be able to do what they need to participate in the legal process the way they should. So I think there's a lot of latent demand that can be made more efficient. That's I think a very foundational aspect of this. So Gen AI, I think, is an accelerant. I think the pandemic was an accelerant, but there's a lot of work to be made efficient. And I think in a world that's increasingly complex, and particularly for corporations, where if you're not growing, you're falling behind, you're expanding into new geographies, dealing with new areas and lines of business, and the world is just being regulated more and more all the time. So compliance is more and more challenging, and that's not going to stop anytime soon.
So along those lines, how do you think that law firms can use Wolters Kluwer's services, for example, to stay ahead of their competitors? What is some way that they could use it maybe to their advantage with their own clients?
So I think using the Vital Law platform and Wolters Kluwer's content, thinking about it a little bit more in terms of the practical aspects of what you can do with the information now with Gen AI, I think is a very distinct value add that you get with the Vital Law AI solution that wasn't necessarily there before. So thinking about that, being able to be more creative in terms of how you prompt and understand there are a lot of different things that you can get out of it quickly that you may not have realized before. And then really thinking and being top of mind to go to Vital Law first for legal and regulatory compliance issues. It's not that there aren't other alternatives out there, but I think that's really the core bread and butter of what we do and what we focus on.
You're filling that space of that idea that I was suggesting, is that might be the way that lawyers can make their relationship even, more cemented by
Yes.
providing them with this insight using your system. Where else are they going to get that?
Right. I've always thought understanding your customer's customer is so key to understanding how to serve your customer better. And I think in the legal industry, it's a unique area because we have access to corporations and to law firms. So we can see that whole, chain of value a little bit better. And if we can execute effectively on that, I think that's a great opportunity to be able to think more broadly about what's the outcome that a corporation is looking for, and then understand how to support the value chain more broadly, including making it possible to take information from Wolters Kluwer and make it available to clients in a transparent, seamless way.
One idea that brings to mind is, and this might be an unfair question, but how the proliferation of AI, how there have been some regulatory sandboxes out there. So it does bring to mind an interesting question because there's patting myself on the back that it's interesting, but the question has to do with there are regulatory sandboxes out there. There are experimentations that are going on with how to provide legal services differently. Do you think that the proliferation of generative AI is going to maybe make the introduction of competitors to law firms possible? Do you think that's something else that would come into the mix in the future?
It's interesting because there have been a number of experiments and it hasn't played out yet. I think one of the big issues is access to capital. The law firms aren't capital intensive organizations. They're organizations that are very focused on current assets, current liabilities, billable hour, a lot of human intensity in terms of the production of information. And I think TurboTax is a great example of something that's not in the legal space that was developed, using venture capital dollars, if you will, or being able to pool money that wasn't restricted based upon the rules of lawyer independence that the ABA has. I think it's Section 5.4, if I'm remembering correctly. I'm not a lawyer, so I apologize if I got that wrong. But basically, I think that's one of the big areas that needs to be opened up, is the ability for non-lawyers to be able to develop systems that might potentially be involved in the practice of law, not in the way that it was contemplated in a world before technology. But I think that there's some thoughtful things that get done there. I think there's a lot that can be done that's very TurboTax-like, with appropriate attorney oversight in a rethought framework that could really, move the industry forward and really get to the place where, we're providing justice, I think, to the entire population. Because right now, there's a lot of people that don't have access to justice.
Amen to that. I think the more people that could be brought into having that access, the better, not only for the people themselves, but also for lawyers. Like, that expansion of the market is something that also benefits the profession. What is some advice you might have for legal professionals who are looking to integrate generative AI or just automation in general, technology? What are a couple of pointers you think that they should take to heart?
And Tom, I would say focus on problems. Don't focus on solutions or technology. Sometimes it's good to kind of say, well, how would AI help solve this differently, or might we do something different? But focus on what your goals are. Focus on problems and pain points that you see. Talk to your clients. And in-house attorneys, talk to your customers in-house. Make sure that you understand what is important to the CEO, to the CFO, to your head of sales, or your whatever group you're serving. And I think that will inform a lot more of where you focus and how you apply technology to solve those problems.
100% agree. Talk to your customers is probably the number one standout piece of advice there. We sometimes, when I used to be more of a practicing lawyer, I think we kind of just take more of a top-down approach.
Right. Well, and it is very basic, but sometimes we forget the basic.
And I think actually by calling them customers, it brings it down to earth a little bit.
Yes.
They still, at the end of the day, are customers and we are serving them.
Absolutely.
So along the same lines, what's one or two pieces of advice you would have about how lawyers stay adaptable and open-minded and keep up to date with everything that's going on?
One of the things that I think is really important is to continue to look at technology and continue to try to deploy and use it. I'll give an example. There was a firm I was speaking to a couple months ago, and they had a particular task that they were being asked to do that required machine learning. And they were told specifically, use machine learning for this task. And they said, okay, we can do that. And then the client also asked, as part of their due diligence, another firm, to do the same thing. And they said, we'll get the technology installed next week, which basically meant they didn't get the business. And I think the point here is a lot of this is going to be about competitiveness and understanding how to recognize when the switch gets flipped, if you will. So basically how to understand when the switch is going to get flipped, because right now there are clients that maybe say don't use technology or don't use Gen AI, but I think it's going to flip around the other way pretty quickly, and it's hard to identify when that happens. So continue to engage, continue to use technology. If you're a large firm, make sure that you're appropriately benchmarking and deploying enough resource and pushing and nudging so that you don't get behind.
Wholeheartedly agree with that advice. One other unfair question. What do you think the future of legal services is going to look like, let's say, in 10 years?
It's going to vary by, so many different things. I would love to be able to hear that there are things that happen where you pull the information together and a dispute or a conflict is either avoided, or if there was going to be something that was going to go to court, analytics start to say, hey, here's what you should do, and you get all parties to kind of docu-sign something, and an agreement happens without having to go through and litigate the whole matter, and all the complexities there. I think when I think of something as basic as a traffic accident, we're going to have cameras in intersections and on cars and sensors and all these other things. And I just have to believe there's going to be some ways for things like as simple as, an automobile accident, which can be a life-changing thing, where some situations might be easy to resolve. If people have opted into a system, the insurance claim is just automatically handled. So I think there are things like that I look at and say, maybe that won't be 10 years, but I do think that thinking about those sorts of ways where it could almost be lights out is a good principle to consider.
Yeah, and if we have a proliferation of self-driving cars, we might not even need to deal with that, right?
I'll close with one little bit there. One of the things that I've heard that legal research systems using Gen AI have been able to do is take things like a concept like autonomous vehicles and what types of court cases are applicable to something like that. And I've heard that certain Gen AI solutions have actually been able to identify court cases from the 1930s that were related to elevators that were no longer being manned by an elevator operator as potential parallels. And I think that's the cool thing with semantic search and in Gen AI that's so fascinating, is to be able to identify something like that and have a technology relate things that are seemingly unrelated, and when you see it, it's like, oh, that actually makes a lot of sense.
Well, let me ask you this. I ask all of my guests this before we close out, and that's, what makes it worthwhile for you? Like, at the end of the day, we have, you're dealing with really high level, like amazing expert information and advice and expertise for lawyers. On the other hand, generative AI and all this cool new stuff, like what makes it worthwhile for you at the end of the day?
Like solving problems. I like to make a difference. That's, I think, at the central point of it. I would go crazy if I were asked to basically manage the metro system and make sure the trains are running on time. That would be a nightmare job for me, because how do you make that better? You can't be more on time. So from that standpoint, I like being in industries and in places like today, which is super exciting. We're at the inflection point with new technologies. They're going to fundamentally change the way the practice of law is going to occur, but also, how society is going to operate in many ways. And I think that's an exciting time to be in industry, and an exciting time to be able to try to make differences and to help make things better.
Well, I think that's a great high point to end on. Thank you so much, Ken, for being on my show.
Hey, thank you, Tom. It's a pleasure and honor to be here. I hope that I have, met the expectations of your audience.
Oh, I'm sure you've exceeded it. And at the same time, I want to give them the opportunity to keep in touch with you and learn more. What's a good way for them to reach out to you and keep in touch?
Sure. So certainly LinkedIn. I also have a regular column on Above the Law. So those are two places that you can find me on social media or out in the blog sphere.
Well, fantastic. Thanks again. And also, I just want to say thanks to all of you for tuning in. I'll see you next time. Thank you so much for watching the latest episode of the LawDroid Manifesto podcast. To keep in the loop about upcoming episodes, please subscribe to LawDroid Manifesto and you'll get notified. Thanks for watching. See you next time.